Okay friends, to get started on this, first we need to disconnect our negative battery terminal. We'll set that aside away from the battery. Right underneath the backside upper area of your fuel tank is where you're going to find your fuel pressure sensor. As you can see, more than likely I could get to that and I could take off the wiring, but I probably won't be able to take off the sensor from the top of the tank because that's where the body of the truck is. Theoretically, you could either just lower the tank down a little bit so you can get access to it, or you could remove the tank completely depending on your situation. For us, we're just going to go ahead and take the fuel tank out of here because it's much easier for video purposes. So now while we're underneath the truck, what we're going to need to do is remove the straps that hold the fuel tank up to the body of the truck. To do that, you're of course going to want to support the fuel tank with something that you can raise up and then of course lower down once we remove the straps. You're going to find that you have one of the strap bolts located right here, and then the other one's located on the other strap pretty much in the same spot. With the fuel tank supported, let's start removing our straps. Just give this a little twist. Set this aside, do the same to the forward strap. Set this aside as well. Now that we have both of those straps off of there, let's continue on the rear of the fuel tank, and we're going to loosen up both of these hose clamps. After that, go ahead and break the hoses free from the fuel tank and separate them. So now that our hose clamps are nice and loose, we need to continue on by breaking our hoses free from the fuel tank. Essentially what I mean by that, just go ahead and grab onto it, try to give it a nice little twist, and see if you can get it to come free. If you can't get it to break free, you can carefully try to use some pliers just to try to grab around it and give it a nice little twist, but be very careful not to put a crack or a damage on your hose. There's one. Check your hoses, give them a nice little squeeze. Make sure you don't see very much dry rot coming across here. If you see dry rot, just go ahead and replace that hose. There we are. The next thing we need to do is remove this bolt right here, which is going to be holding this bracket. We want to have as much clearance between the fuel tank and the differential as possible. There we are. We can move this. Set that aside. So now that we have those fuel hoses off of the back of the fuel tank, I want to come back up to the front and I want to show you a couple things. What you're going to notice along the front of the fuel tank / this rail right here is the fuel tank comes up and over this. You'll also notice that it comes up and over the fuel rail on the side over here, or along the frame I should say. So with that said, essentially what we need to do to be able to get this fuel tank down is to go back a little bit and a little bit towards the passenger side as we do that. Just pay special attention because there really isn't very much holding your fuel tank in, an exception of a couple fuel lines up along the top and of course some wiring. We don't want to put any tugs on either of those. Let's carefully start lowering this down. Okay. Slide it rearward. Alright, so now with the fuel tank down a little bit, we have a clear view of this area right along here. Firstly, what I usually like to do is remove the wiring from it. You're going to notice that there's a gray tab, which is the lock. You essentially want to kind of just pry on that and pull it away. Once you've done that, there's going to be a little push tab right in the center. Go ahead and push down on that push tab and then draw this off. It's always a good idea to make sure you check for any corrosion on any wiring. If you see any corrosion, you need to make sure you deal with it. Let's go ahead and set that aside. At this point, we've got our fuel lines right up here. You're going to need a tool that looks like this. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to go around the plastic part of the fuel pump and then slide into the fuel line itself. Just going to go ahead and push that in as far as I can. Take the fuel line, push it towards the fuel pump, and then release it just like that. Do the same to both lines. At this point, we want to continue bringing down the fuel tank. Something to pay quick attention to is the fact that you want to make sure that you have the lifting point kind of in the center of your fuel tank, because if you have it more towards the back or even towards the front, of course there's going to be more weight shifting in that general direction. So if you have too much fuel coming this way, it's going to make the tank kind of want to fall towards the rear. So now the next thing that we need to pay attention to is this front area along here. You're going to see on the fuel tank that it has a lip that comes across the entire front. It's going to end up wanting to get caught right along here. So what we need to do is kind of have this up a little bit. I'm going to come in between here with a pry bar and just try to pry it away a little bit. As I'm prying it, I'm going to slowly lower this down, and we're going to try to get the front to come down below this, and then we can bring the fuel tank down. Let's go ahead and hold onto that fuel tank so it can't go anywhere. So now with this down, we have a nice clear view of this line right here. If you were to just kind of grab onto it, there's going to be two little tabs that you can squeeze with your fingers. And then you should be able to separate this. There we are. Now let's move to the rear of the fuel tank again. Carefully grab onto this tab right here, gently pull up on it, and you should be able to slide this off. Now just confirm that everything's completely disconnected, and then go ahead and lower down your fuel tank. Now up along the back of the fuel tank, up along the top, you're going to find where your fuel pressure sensor is. Go ahead and spray this with some air just to make sure there's clear of any debris. Along the driver's side of the fuel tank, you're going to see that you have a little tab here. Go ahead and lift up on that and push this to the side. At this point, you can go ahead and pry up on this, and we'll pop this right out of here. There it is, friends. Let's go ahead and clean up around that hole. Now it's going to be time to install our brand new sensor. If you have a little bit of grease, go ahead and slide it on there. That's just going to help this slide in. Just going to line it up with its tabs. Push it right in, make sure it's secured, and of course, lock it down. So now as we bring the fuel tank in, we want to make sure that we're putting the back end up and over the differential first, then we'll slide it back a little bit so we can get the forward end in. Just to keep in mind that we have the lines and of course the wiring all up along the top. You have the one line in the front, you have the two lines and the wiring in the center, and then of course you have the wiring all the way in the far rear that we're going to have to connect in. There we are. So now we have this pretty close to where it needs to be. Let's continue on by connecting in our lines and wiring. Let's go ahead and line these up. Make sure you listen for a click and give it a nice tug. You definitely don't want anything like this coming apart on top of your fuel tank because it's going to be very difficult to connect it in once the fuel tank's completely up. Listen for the click, give it a nice tug. Go ahead and put back in your lock, assuming yours isn't broken. Now we're going to put on our lines on the fuel pump. Make sure you go ahead and take off these covers. We'll recycle those. Connect these into their corresponding sides. With everything connected in, we can continue going up. And put the back side up and in over the differential a little bit so we can slide the front in. Here we are. I'm going to bring this up so it's almost touching, and then we're going to push it all the way up against the frame rail on the driver's side. Perfect. Continue jacking it up. So now you want to have the fuel tank so it's pressed all the way up against the driver's side frame rail, but not necessarily all the way against the top. We still want to have a little bit of wiggle room so we can get our hoses on here. One thing you want to pay attention to when you're doing this is you want to make sure when you're moving your fuel tank around, it doesn't slide off of the jack and of course hit the ground or potentially hurt anybody. Slide that on there. Slide that on there as well. Put the clamps back to the original starting positions when you remove them, and then go ahead and snug them up. Okay, that's nice and snug. All right, those are nice and snug. Let's move along to installing our fuel tank straps. You're going to notice when it's time to install your fuel straps that there are two different shapes. You're going to have one that has an L shape with a much longer upward angle. The one with a longer upward angle is going to be for the rear. It's going to go all the way back here. And then the one with the shorter upward angle is going to go towards the front. There we are. There's the forward one. So now we're going to take our mounting bolt, we're going to get it ready to come through our frame hole here, and it's going to line up with this area of the strap. Let's start both of our bolts in by hand, and then we'll continue on by snugging them up. Now the next thing that you want to do is make sure that the straps are sitting along the channels on the fuel tank where they're supposed to be, and then snug them up. Now it's going to be time to resecure our e-brake cable. I'm just going to bring this right over here, and I'll put in my bolt right down along the bottom here. We'll snug that right up. Now let's just go ahead and get this support out of here, and then we'll get back up under the hood. Go ahead and connect in your negative battery terminal. Make sure it's 100% secured. Okay friends, now all you have to do is start up the truck and make sure you don't have a check engine light.